Billionaire ex-husband buys her company and forces her to be his secretary. What he keeps hidden in his desk destroys her. Nala Jones stood frozen in the executive suite doorway, her resignation letter crumpled in trembling fingers. The man behind the mahogany desk, her company's new owner, slowly lifted his head from the acquisition papers. Harrison Caldwell, her ex-husband, the same eyes that once promised forever, now held the power to destroy everything she'd built. "Hello, Nala," he said quietly, voice carrying 3 years of unspoken pain. "I believe you're here about a position?" The resignation letter slipped from her grasp, fluttering to the marble floor like a white flag of surrender. 3 years. 3 years since she'd chosen an emergency board meeting over his father's funeral. 3 years since he'd walked out of their penthouse apartment with nothing but a suitcase and words that still echoed in her dreams. "You'll always choose the company over us, won't you?" Now here he sat, immaculate in his charcoal suit, behind the desk that used to be hers. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. Harrison. His name felt foreign on her tongue, like speaking a language she'd once been fluent in but had forgotten through disuse. "I didn't know you were. I thought the acquisition was being handled by Caldwell Investments." His voice held that familiar professional detachment she remembered from their worst fights. "My firm. Though I suppose you didn't bother to research the buyer." He gestured to the leather chair across from his desk, her old guest chair where she'd once hosted Fortune 500 CEOs. "Please sit." The walk across her former office felt like a death march. Every step reminded her of what she'd lost. The corner windows overlooking downtown Seattle, the awards lining the walls, the family photo of her and her mother at her MIT graduation, now replaced with Harrison's business degrees and acquisition trophies. 847 employees. That's how many people depended on her swallowing her pride and sitting in this chair. 847 families who'd trusted her to build something lasting, something that mattered. The same families she'd chosen over her marriage, and now the same families Harrison held in his perfectly manicured hands. "You mentioned a position," she said, fighting to keep her voice steady. The words tasted like ash. "What exactly are you proposing?" Harrison leaned back in the executive chair, her chair, and studied her with those storm-gray eyes that had once looked at her like she hung the moon. Now they held something else entirely. Calculation? Revenge? Or was that pain she glimpsed before he shuttered his expression? "Executive assistant," he said simply. "Some might call it a secretarial position." The words hit like a physical blow. Executive assistant, secretary. She, who had built this company from nothing more than a brilliant idea and relentless determination, would be reduced to managing someone else's calendar. His calendar. "You can't be serious." Her voice cracked despite her efforts. "Deadly serious?" He picked up a fountain pen, Mont Blanc she noticed, the one she'd given him for their 2nd anniversary, and began signing documents with practiced efficiency. "The position comes with a competitive salary, full benefits, and the assurance that your employees will keep their jobs." Her employees. He knew exactly which buttons to push, didn't he? Harrison had always been brilliant at reading people, understanding their deepest vulnerabilities. It's what made him such a formidable businessman. It's also what had made him such a devastating husband when their marriage started falling apart. "And if I refuse?" He looked up then, and for just a moment, his professional mask slipped. She saw the boy she'd fallen in love with at Harvard Business School, the one who used to study beside her in the library until closing time, who would bring her Ethiopian coffee and kiss her temple when she got frustrated with case studies. "Then I'll be forced to restructure the company for maximum efficiency. Redundancies will be eliminated." His words were carefully chosen, clinical, but she heard the threat beneath them. Starting with the Seattle office. Her breath caught in her throat. The Seattle office housed 430 employees. Families. People who'd trusted her, who'd followed her vision and built something beautiful together. "You bastard," she whispered. "I've been called worse." He set down his pen and removed his wedding ring, a gesture he'd always made when nervous, though his hand was now bare. The tan line was barely visible anymore. "This is a business decision, Nala, nothing personal." Nothing personal. The man she'd once loved with every fiber of her being was systematically dismantling her life's work, and he called it nothing personal. She thought about the early days when she'd worked 18-hour shifts in her garage, surviving on determination and takeout Chinese food. The first time she'd landed a major client, she'd called Harrison before anyone else, even before her mother. He had driven across town with champagne and strawberries, and they'd made love on her desk until dawn, celebrating not just her success, but their shared dreams. Now that same desk belonged to him, and she was begging for scraps. When would I start? The words felt like swallowing glass. Monday morning, 8 sharp. He handed her a folder, expensive paper, embossed with the Caldwell Investments logo. Your employment contract. I trust you'll find the terms acceptable. She took the folder with hands that barely shook. After everything they'd been through, she wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing her break. Not here. Not now. One question. She stood, smoothing her skirt with as much dignity as she could muster. Why me? You could hire any executive assistant in the city. Why choose your ex-wife? For a long moment, he said nothing. The silence stretched between them like a chasm filled with 3 years of hurt and unanswered questions. When he finally spoke, his voice was so quiet she had to lean forward to hear. Because you know this company better than anyone. Because despite everything that happened between us, you're the most brilliant strategic mind I've ever encountered. He paused, and something vulnerable flickered in his expression. And because I couldn't bear to watch you lose everything you'd worked for. The admission hung in the air between them, dangerous and raw. For just a moment, she saw the man who used to hold her during thunderstorms, who would cancel important meetings when she had the flu, who once told her she was his North Star. Then, the moment passed, and Harrison Caldwell, CEO and her new boss, was back in control. I'll see you Monday morning, Nayla. Don't be late. She walked toward the door on unsteady legs, everything inside her screaming to run, to fight, to do anything but accept this humiliation. But at the threshold, she turned back. For what it's worth, she said quietly, I'm sorry. About your father. About the funeral. About, don't. The word cut like a blade. Just, don't. She nodded and left, pulling the door closed on the life she'd once known and the man she'd once loved. In the hallway, she leaned against the wall and closed her eyes, fighting back tears that would only make her look weaker. Monday morning seemed both a lifetime away and far too soon. The elevator ride down felt like descending into purgatory. Each floor brought her closer to facing the employees she'd failed, the people who'd trusted her to protect their livelihoods and careers. How could she explain that their founder, their CEO, their leader, was now reduced to fetching coffee for the man who'd bought them out? When the elevator doors opened on the main floor, she walked past the reception desk where Monica had worked for 5 years, past the break room where she'd celebrated birthdays and promotions, past the conference room where she'd pitched the idea that became their flagship product. Everything looked the same, but everything had changed. Nala? She turned to find Lisa Sterling, her executive assistant, former executive assistant, standing in the hallway with a stack of files. Lisa's expression shifted from confusion to horror as she took in Nala's face. Oh my God, the meeting with the new owner, how did it… Lisa's words died as understanding dawned in her eyes. It's him, isn't it? Harrison. Nala nodded, not trusting her voice. And? I start Monday morning. Nala forced herself to stand straighter. As his executive assistant. Lisa's gasp echoed in the hallway. Nala, no, you can't. There has to be another way. There isn't. Nala's voice came out stronger than she felt. 847 people, Lisa. I won't let them lose their jobs because of my pride. But you built this place. This is your company, your vision. Not anymore. Nala glanced around the familiar space one last time. Take care of everyone for me, okay? And Lisa, don't make this harder than it already is. She walked away before Lisa could respond, before the tears she'd been holding back could fall, before she changed her mind and stormed back upstairs to tell Harrison Caldwell exactly what she thought of his business decision. Outside, Seattle's October rain matched her mood, gray, relentless, and cold. She sat in her car for 10 minutes, staring up at the building she'd once owned, watching lights flicker on in offices where her employees were probably discussing the acquisition, wondering what it meant for their futures. The weekend passed in a blur of resignation and preparation. Nala cleaned out her home office, boxing up awards and mementos from her entrepreneurial journey. Each item told a story: the first prototype of their logistics software, the newspaper clipping from their IPO announcement, the photo of her ringing the opening bell at NASDAQ. She folded her designer suits and replaced them with more conservative attire. Executive assistants didn't wear Armani to intimidate competitors in boardrooms. They wore modest blouses and pencil skirts, projecting competence without overshadowing their bosses. Sunday evening, she called her mother. "You sound tired, sweetheart," Ruth Jones said after they'd exchanged pleasantries. "Everything all right with the company?" "There's been a change," Nala said carefully. "We've been acquired." "Acquired? But you never mentioned who bought you out." Nala closed her eyes. "Caldwell Investments." The silence stretched so long, Nala wondered if the call had dropped. "Harrison," her mother said finally. It wasn't a question. "Yes." "And what does this mean for you?" "I'm staying on, in a different capacity." Ruth Jones hadn't raised a daughter who became a Fortune 500 CEO by being naive. "What kind of different capacity?" "Executive assistant." The sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line cut straight through Nala's heart. "Baby girl," her mother said softly, "you can't do this to yourself. I can't let 800 people lose their jobs because of my pride." "This isn't about pride. This is about him punishing you for choosing work for missing his father's funeral, for being exactly the kind of wife he never wanted." Nala's voice cracked. "Maybe I deserve this." "Don't you dare!" Ruth's voice turned fierce. "Don't you dare let that man make you believe you deserve humiliation. You made mistakes, yes, but you built something beautiful, something that employs hundreds of families. That matters." Monday morning arrived with the inevitability of an execution date. Nala stood in front of her bathroom mirror at 6:30 a.m., applying makeup with hands that refused to stay steady. She'd chosen a simple black blouse and gray pencil skirt, professional but not attention-seeking. Executive assistant appropriate. She arrived at the building at 7:45, giving herself time to adjust to her new reality before facing Harrison. The security guard, Marcus, looked confused when she signed in as a visitor rather than swiping her executive key card. "Morning, Miss Jones. Something wrong with your card?" "I don't work here anymore, Marcus." "Well, I do, but—" She forced a smile. "It's complicated. I'm working for the new owner now." Marcus's expression softened with understanding and sympathy that made her want to crawl under a rock. The elevator ride to the executive floor felt longer than usual. When the doors opened, she found Lisa Sterling waiting with a box of tissues and a determinedly bright expression. "Thought you might need these," Lisa said gently. "And I brought you coffee, Ethiopian blend, just how you like it." The kindness nearly broke her. "Lisa, don't thank me. Just survive this, okay? And remember that half the people in this building would follow you anywhere. That hasn't changed." Nala accepted the coffee with gratitude and made her way to Harrison's office, her former office. The nameplate on the door now read, "Harrison Caldwell, Chief Executive Officer," in elegant brass lettering. She knocked at exactly 8 a.m. "Come in." He looked up when she entered, and for a moment, something flickered in his expression. Regret? Pain? But it was gone so quickly she might have imagined it. "Punctual? Good." He gestured to a smaller desk positioned near the windows, her old assistant's desk, she realized with a fresh wave of humiliation. "Lisa left some materials to help you get oriented. Your primary responsibilities will be managing my calendar, correspondence, and serving as liaison with department heads." "Of course." She set her purse in the desk drawer and powered on the computer. The screen requested her new login credentials, Nala Jones, assistant here at caldwellinv.com. Even her email address announced her diminished status to the world. "I take my coffee black, Ethiopian blend if possible," Harrison continued in a crisp, businesslike tone. "I prefer printed copies of reports rather than digital versions for morning meetings. My calendar's strictly managed, 15-minute buffers between appointments, and never schedule anything before 8 a.m. or after 6 p.m. unless it's an emergency." She nodded, taking notes like a good employee, all while dying a little inside. Any questions? Just one. She looked up from her notepad. How do you want me to address you? In front of others, I mean. The question seemed to surprise him. He was quiet for a long moment, and she watched his jaw work as he considered his answer. Mr. Caldwell will be fine, he said finally. Not Harrison, not even by his first name. Mr. Caldwell, like she was any other employee who'd never seen him vulnerable, never held him when he cried after his first major business failure, never promised to love him for better or worse. Understood, Mr. Caldwell. Something flashed across his features at the formal address, but he recovered quickly. I have a meeting with the department heads at 9. Please make sure conference room A is set up with the usual. Water, coffee, notepads, and I'll need 10 copies of the restructuring proposal. The restructuring proposal? Her heart stuttered. On your desk. I need you to review it and provide feedback by this afternoon. Your intimate knowledge of company operations will be useful. She found the document waiting for her, 47 pages of clinical analysis that reduced her life's work to profit margins and efficiency metrics. As she skimmed the executive summary, her blood ran cold. Projected layoffs, 23% of workforce, 194 employees, office consolidations, closed satellite locations in Portland and Denver, 78 additional jobs, executive restructuring, eliminate redundant leadership positions, 12 senior staff, 284 people. Harrison was planning to eliminate 284 jobs to maximize shareholder value. This is, she began. Necessary, he cut her off. The company has been operating with unsustainable overhead for years. These changes will ensure long-term viability. Unsustainable overhead? Her voice rose despite her efforts to stay professional. Those are people, Harrison. People with families, mortgages, children in college. Mr. Caldwell, he corrected coolly. And yes, I'm aware they're people. But sentiment doesn't balance budgets or satisfy investors. She stared at him, this stranger wearing her ex-husband's face, and wondered when he'd become so cold. The Harrison she'd married would have agonized over every single layoff, would have looked for alternatives until the very last moment. Of course, Mr. Caldwell. I'll have my feedback ready this afternoon. She spent the morning preparing for his meeting, setting up conference room A with military precision, making sure the Ethiopian coffee was perfect, that the temperature was exactly 68 degrees, that every detail met his exacting standards. When the department heads filed in, people she'd hired, promoted, trusted, their expressions ranged from confused to sympathetic to carefully neutral. She caught Robert Covey's eye as he took his seat at the conference table where they'd once been equals. He mouthed, "Are you okay?" And she managed a tiny nod. Have you ever had to swallow your pride to save something bigger than yourself? Nala's walking into the hardest battle of her life, and it's about to get much more complicated. Tell me where you're watching from, and hit subscribe if you're already feeling the tension between these two. Harrison entered the conference room with the commanding presence she remembered, but now it was directed at her company, her people. He nodded acknowledgement to the assembled executives, her former peers, and took his place at the head of the table. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming. I know this transition has been unusual, but I want to assure you that Caldwell Investments is committed to the long-term success of this organization. Nala stood by the side wall, notepad ready, trying to make herself invisible while her heart broke a little more with each word. However, success requires difficult decisions. The restructuring proposal I'm distributing today outlines necessary changes to ensure our competitive position in the market. She watched faces change as the executives read the summary page. Shock, anger, resignation. Robert Covey's face went pale as he scanned the numbers. Brandon Clark from Strategic Development looked like he'd been punched in the stomach. These were good people, brilliant people, who'd built something meaningful together. Now they were reading their potential death sentences in corporate double-speak. I understand this is difficult, Harrison continued, but we cannot allow sentiment to override business necessity. Every decision will be made based on measurable performance metrics and strategic value. Robert Covey raised his hand. What about the employees who've been with the company since the beginning? The ones who sacrificed competitive salaries to build something from the ground up? Loyalty is admirable, Harrison replied smoothly, but it doesn't guarantee job security in a competitive marketplace. We'll be evaluating all positions based on current contribution and future potential. Nala's pen snapped in her grip. She stared down at the broken pieces, blue ink staining her fingers, and fought the urge to scream. "Miss Jones!" Harrison's voice cut through her fury. "Could you please get us fresh coffee? This pot seems to have gone cold." Every head in the room turned toward her. Her former colleagues, people who used to seek her opinion on major decisions, now watching her fetch coffee for the man who'd bought their loyalty out from under them. "Of course, Mr. Caldwell." She walked to the coffee station with as much dignity as she could muster, acutely aware of the whispered conversations behind her. As she reached across the table to refill his cup, Harrison's sleeve brushed against her wrist. The contact lasted less than a second, but it sent electricity shooting up her arm, the same spark that had ignited between them the first day they'd met in Professor Morrison's advanced strategy seminar. She nearly dropped the coffee pot. Harrison went perfectly still, his eyes finding hers across the conference table. For a moment, the professional mask slipped, and she saw something raw and vulnerable in his expression. Recognition. Memory. The same electric awareness that had always existed between them, apparently undimmed by time and hurt. Then, someone cleared their throat, and the moment shattered. "That'll be all for now, Miss Jones," Harrison said quietly, his voice carefully controlled. She was so absorbed in analyzing the restructuring proposal that she didn't notice Harrison approaching until he cleared his throat. "Working late?" he asked. She glanced at her computer clock, 6:47 p.m. The office was empty except for the two of them and the night cleaning crew. "I wanted to finish reviewing the proposal," she said, not looking up from the documents. "I'll have my feedback ready first thing tomorrow morning." "That's not necessary. I can what?" She finally met his eyes, and the exhaustion she'd been fighting all day crashed over her like a wave. "Go home to my empty apartment and pretend this is normal? Pretend that working for my ex-husband is just another job?" He was quiet for a long moment, studying her face in the lamplight. When he spoke, his voice was softer than it had been all day. "You look tired." "I am tired. I'm tired of pretending this doesn't hurt. I'm tired of watching you systematically dismantle everything I built. I'm tired of calling you Mr. Caldwell when I used to call you—" She stopped herself before she said something she'd regret. "What did you used to call me, Nala?" The question was barely above a whisper, and it carried so much weight she could barely breathe under it. She used to call him her anchor, her safe harbor, her home. She used to call him by the pet name she'd given him their first night together, Bear, because he'd held her so protectively, made her feel so safe. "It doesn't matter," she said instead. "That person doesn't exist anymore." Something flickered across his expression, pain maybe, or regret, but it was gone before she could be sure. "No," he agreed quietly. "I suppose he doesn't." The next morning brought discovery that would change everything. While organizing Harrison's office files, Nala found something that made her heart stop, a hidden drawer in the mahogany desk containing their honeymoon photo. Her laughing on Santorini Beach, his arms around her waist, both of them glowing with new love and infinite possibility. She was holding the silver frame, memories flooding back like a tidal wave, when Harrison's voice made her jump. "Find everything you need?" She spun around, the photo clutched against her chest. Harrison stood in the doorway, having just returned from a client meeting, his expression unreadable. "You kept this," she whispered, holding up the photo. He stepped into the office and closed the door, his movements careful and controlled. "I kept everything that mattered." "Then why did you let me go?" The question hung between them like a live wire. Harrison moved closer until he was standing directly in front of her, close enough that she could smell his cologne, see the flecks of silver in his gray eyes that hadn't been there 3 years ago. "Because you let me go first," he said softly. "Every late meeting, every crisis that took priority over us, every time you chose the company over our marriage. You were already gone, Nala. I just made it official." His fingers brushed hers. As he reached for the photo, neither pulled away. The contact sent heat spiraling through her body, awakening nerve endings that had been dormant since their divorce. "I was trying to build something for us," she said, her voice barely audible. "I thought if I could make the company successful enough, secure enough, then I could relax. Then I could be the wife you wanted." "I never wanted a different wife," Harrison said fiercely. I wanted the woman I married, brilliant, passionate, driven. I just wanted to be part of your world instead of watching from the sidelines. They were standing so close now that she could feel his breath on her face, could see the way his pupils dilated as he looked at her. The photo was still trapped between their hands, their fingers intertwined around the frame. "Harrison," she whispered. "We can't," he said, but his thumb was stroking along her knuckles, his eyes fixed on her mouth. "This is impossible. I'm your boss. You work for me. I know all the reasons why we can't." She looked up at him through her lashes. "Tell me one reason why we should." "Because I never stopped." He cut himself off, his jaw clenching with the effort of restraint. "Never stopped what?" Before he could answer, Anthony Reed's voice boomed from the outer office. "Harrison, you in there? We need to discuss the Morrison Industries situation." They sprang apart like guilty teenagers, Harrison stepping behind his desk, while Nala carefully placed the photo back in its hiding place, her hands trembling. "Come in, Anthony," Harrison called, his voice only slightly strained. The moment was broken, but the awareness between them remained, dangerous, electric, and absolutely undeniable. Chapter 2. The next morning arrived with uncomfortable tension. Nala had barely slept, replaying the moment when Harrison's fingers had brushed hers, the way he'd looked at her like she was still precious to him. Now, sitting at her assistant's desk, she tried to pretend that nothing had changed while her body hummed with awareness every time he moved in his office. "Morning, Miss Jones." Harrison's voice was carefully professional as he emerged from the elevator, but she caught the way his eyes lingered on her face, searching for signs of the connection they'd almost acknowledged yesterday. "Good morning, Mr. Caldwell. Your coffee is ready, and I've printed your morning reports." "Thank you." He paused by her desk, and she caught a whiff of his cologne. "Any word from Brandon Clark about the strategic development meeting?" Brandon Clark, the brilliant young executive who'd been asking to meet with them, about the restructuring proposal. She'd almost forgotten in the chaos of yesterday's revelation. "He's requested this afternoon at 3 p.m. He specifically asked if I would attend." Something flickered in Harrison's expression. "He asked for you specifically." "He values my opinion on strategic matters. We worked closely together on the European expansion project." Harrison's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I see. And what exactly is the nature of your relationship with Mr. Clark?" The question caught her off guard. "He's a valuable employee." "Why?" "Just making sure I understand all the dynamics at play." His tone was neutral, but she heard something underneath it that sounded suspiciously like jealousy. Brandon Clark arrived for the meeting with nervous energy and what appeared to be flowers. Not roses or anything overtly romantic, just a simple bouquet of sunflowers with a card. "Miss Jones," he said, offering the flowers with a shy smile. "These are for you. I heard about your new position. I wanted you to know how much I admire your sacrifice for the company." Harrison, who'd been reviewing documents, looked up sharply. Nala felt her cheeks flush as she accepted the flowers, acutely aware of Harrison's intense scrutiny. "That's very thoughtful, Brandon, but unnecessary." "It's the most selfless thing I've ever seen," Brandon interrupted, his admiration evident. "Giving up your executive position to protect everyone's jobs, taking a role so far beneath your capabilities just to stay and fight for us." The hero worship in his voice was unmistakable, and Nala saw Harrison's expression grow increasingly dark. "Mr. Clark," Harrison said coolly, "perhaps we should focus on the business matters you wanted to discuss." Brandon's attention shifted reluctantly to Harrison, and Nala caught the flash of resentment in the younger man's eyes. He clearly saw Harrison as the villain in this story, with Nala as the martyred heroine. For the next hour, Brandon presented a passionate defense of his department, but Nala noticed how often he directed his comments to her rather than Harrison, seeking her approval, her nods of agreement, her validation of his strategic thinking. "The European expansion alone could generate $50 million in new revenue," Brandon said, his eyes fixed on Nala. "You understood the potential when we first discussed it. You saw the vision." "Projected revenue," Harrison corrected sharply, "based on optimistic assumptions about markets where we have no established presence." Conservative estimates still put us at 35 million, Brandon replied, finally looking at Harrison. Miss Jones's research was thorough and realistic. There it was again. The appeal to her authority, the suggestion that her judgment was superior to Harrison's. Nala saw the muscle tick in Harrison's jaw and realized she was watching more than a business discussion. This was a territorial dispute with her as the prize. Miss Jones's research was indeed comprehensive, Harrison said evenly. However, final decisions about resource allocation rest with current management. Of course, Brandon said quickly, but his tone suggested he thought current management was making a mistake. I just hoped. He looked at Nala again. I know you believe in this project. You were excited about the possibilities when we first developed the proposal. After Brandon left, the air in the conference room crackled with tension. Harrison stood at the windows, his back rigid with controlled emotion. He's in love with you, he said without turning around. That's ridiculous. He admires my work. He brought you flowers, Nala. He looks at you like you're Joan of Arc leading a righteous crusade. Harrison turned to face her, his eyes blazing. That's not professional admiration. Even if it were true, it's not reciprocated. Isn't it? He moved closer, his voice dropping dangerously low. You light up when he praises your vision. You defend his projects with passion. You see him as the promising protégé who still believes in your dreams. And that threatens you? Everything about this threatens me. He was standing directly in front of her now, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. Watching you sacrifice yourself for this company, watching other men recognize your brilliance while I have to pretend you're just my secretary, watching you care more about their careers than your own dignity. His voice was raw with frustration and something deeper, possessiveness, longing, the kind of desperate need that made people do stupid things. Harrison, you want to know what threatens me most? His hand rose toward her face, hovering just inches from her cheek. The fact that I still want to protect you from everything, including myself. The confession hung between them like a loaded weapon. Nala's pulse hammered against her throat as she stared up at him, seeing the man she'd married beneath the cold CEO facade. Maybe I don't need protecting, she whispered. You do. His thumb traced the air near her jawline without quite touching. Because if I touch you right now, I won't be able to stop. And you deserve better than being anyone's secret, especially mine. The almost touch was more devastating than actual contact would have been. She could feel the heat radiating from his hand, could imagine how his fingers would feel against her skin. What if I don't want better? She asked breathlessly. Harrison's control visibly cracked. He stepped closer, backing her against the conference table, his hands braced on either side of her body. Don't say things like that, he warned, his voice rough with want. Don't make this harder than it already is. Why? Because you might remember what it felt like when I was yours? Because I never forgot. The words were torn from somewhere deep in his chest. Because every night for 3 years I've gone to bed remembering exactly how you taste, how you sound when I... Excuse me? Lisa Sterling's voice from the doorway made them both jump apart. Sorry, I was looking for the quarterly reports? Oh. Her eyes widened as she took in their compromising position, Harrison's hands still braced against the table, Nala trapped between his arms. The reports are on my desk, Nala managed, her voice only slightly breathless. Top drawer, manila folder? Right, of course, I'll just... Lisa grabbed the folder and practically fled, but not before Nala caught the knowing look in her eyes. After Lisa left, Harrison stepped back, running both hands through his hair. This is exactly what I was afraid of, he said grimly. Office gossip, speculation about our relationship, questions about my judgment. Harrison, we can't do this, Nala. Whatever this is, whatever we're feeling, we can't act on it. But sometimes the universe has other plans. Thursday's late morning brought an unexpected power outage that trapped them in Harrison's private elevator between the 42nd and 43rd floors. Emergency lighting cast everything in a dim, intimate glow as they waited for maintenance to restore power. How long do you think we'll be stuck? Nala asked, trying to ignore how small the space felt with Harrison's presence filling it. Could be minutes, could be hours. He was sitting on the elevator floor, his back against the wall, tie loosened, looking more relaxed than she'd seen him since the acquisition. She slid down the opposite wall, her skirt smoothing around her knees. In the confined space, she could hear his breathing, smell his cologne, feel the weight of 3 years of unspoken words pressing against her chest. "This brings back memories," she said quietly. "The first time we were stuck in an elevator together. Harvard Business School, Morrison Hall. You were reviewing for the corporate strategy final, and you were having a panic attack about the ethics case study." His voice was soft with memory. "You kept hyperventilating, convinced you were going to fail. You talked me through breathing exercises for 45 minutes, made me focus on your voice instead of my fear. You got the highest grade in the class on that exam." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the emergency lighting casting shadows that softened the harsh lines of their current reality. "What happened to us, Harrison?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. "How did we go from being best friends to being strangers?" He was quiet for so long, she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was heavy with regret. "We stopped talking to each other and started talking past each other. We stopped being partners and became competitors. I never wanted to compete with you. Didn't you?" He looked at her directly, his eyes reflecting the dim light. "Every success you had, every milestone the company reached, it felt like proof that you didn't need me, that you were better off without me slowing you down." The pain in his voice made her chest ache. "You never slowed me down. You made everything better, brighter, more meaningful. Then why did you choose the board meeting over my father's funeral?" There it was, the question that had haunted both of them for 3 years, the moment that had shattered their marriage beyond repair. "Because I was terrified," she admitted, tears starting to blur her vision. "Because the Morrison deal was falling apart, and if we lost that contract, we'd have to lay off 60 people before Christmas. Because I thought one more crisis, one more failure, and you'd realize you'd married someone who was drowning instead of someone who had everything under control. So you drowned alone instead." "Yes." The word came out as a broken whisper. "And I lost the Morrison deal anyway. And I lost you. And I lost the respect of half my employees who thought I was heartless for missing the funeral of the man who'd welcomed me into his family like a daughter." Harrison was across the small space before she realized he'd moved, pulling her against his chest as tears she'd held back for 3 years finally broke free. "I'm so sorry," she sobbed against his shirt. "I'm sorry I chose wrong. I'm sorry I hurt you. I'm sorry I was too proud and too scared to ask for help when I was falling apart." His arms tightened around her, one hand stroking her hair the way he used to when she had nightmares. "I'm sorry, too," he murmured into her hair. "I'm sorry I gave you an ultimatum instead of fighting for us. I'm sorry I walked away instead of making you listen. I'm sorry I let pride keep me from coming back." She pulled back to look at him, seeing her own pain and regret reflected in his face. "Why did you really buy my company, Harrison? And don't say it was just business." His thumb brushed away her tears as he searched her eyes. "Because Anthony Reed told me you were about to lose everything. Because competitors were circling like vultures, ready to strip your assets and scatter your employees to the wind." His voice dropped to a whisper. "Because I couldn't bear the thought of watching you fall when I had the power to catch you. You bought my company to save it? I bought your company to save you, even if it meant you'd hate me forever, even if it meant destroying any chance we might have had to find our way back to each other." The confession hung between them in the dim elevator, beautiful and heartbreaking and absolutely devastating. "I could never hate you," she whispered. "I tried, but I could never." His mouth found hers in the middle of her sentence, soft and desperate, and tasting like 3 years of longing. She kissed him back with equal desperation, her hands fisting in his shirt, 3 years of walls crumbling in the space of a heartbeat. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Harrison rested his forehead against hers. "This doesn't solve anything," he said quietly. "I'm still your boss. You're still my employee. The board will still question my judgment if they find out. I know. And Brandon Clark is still in love with you. I don't care about Brandon Clark. Don't you?" His eyes searched hers. "He represents everything you built, everything you were before I turned your life upside down. He represents the past. She cupped his face in her hands. "You're the only future I've ever wanted." The elevator lurched back to life, emergency lighting giving way to harsh fluorescence that made them both blink. By the time the doors opened on the 42nd floor, they were standing on opposite sides of the car, professionally composed despite their racing hearts. But something had fundamentally shifted between them. The careful distance they'd maintained was gone, replaced by an electric awareness that made every accidental touch, every shared glance, every professional interaction charged with possibility. The next afternoon brought a development that tested Harrison's newfound emotional vulnerability. Nala was at the printer when Brandon Clark approached, his face bright with excitement. "Miss Jones, I have news about the European expansion project." "Oh," she looked up from collating reports. "I've been reaching out to contacts in London and Frankfurt. There's more interest than we anticipated. I think we could accelerate the timeline if we had the right backing." His enthusiasm was infectious, and despite everything, Nala found herself smiling at his passion for the project she'd helped develop. "That's wonderful, Brandon. Have you run the numbers on accelerated implementation?" "I was hoping we could discuss it over dinner. Tonight, if you're free. I know this great place that serves authentic German food, research for the Frankfurt market." The invitation was clearly personal masquerading as professional, and Nala was about to decline when Harrison's voice cut through the conversation like a blade. "Miss Jones." His tone was carefully controlled, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. "I need those reports immediately." "Of course, Mr. Caldwell." She gathered the papers quickly. "Brandon, perhaps we could discuss this during regular office hours." "Actually," Harrison interrupted, "Mr. Clark, I'd like to speak with you about the strategic development timeline." "My office, now." Brandon's face flushed, but he nodded. "Yes, sir." As the two men walked toward Harrison's office, Nala caught the rigid set of Harrison's jaw, the possessive edge to his stride. Jealousy radiated from him like heat waves, and despite the complicated nature of their situation, she felt a traitorous thrill at his reaction. 20 minutes later, Harrison emerged from his office alone, his face thunderous. Brandon was nowhere to be seen. "Where's Brandon?" Nala asked carefully. "Reconsidering his dinner plans." Harrison's voice was clipped, and his approach to interdepartmental communications. "Harrison, you can't intimidate employees just because—" "Because what?" He stopped at her desk, his eyes blazing. "Because they're asking my secretary to dinner? Because they're using business projects as excuses to spend time with you? Because you're jealous." The accusation hung in the air between them. Harrison's jaw worked as he struggled with his response. "You're right," he said finally. "I am jealous, violently, irrationally, completely inappropriately jealous." He moved around her desk, backing her chair against the window. "I'm jealous that he gets to admire you openly. I'm jealous that he can praise your intelligence without worrying about gossip. I'm jealous that he sees you as the brilliant strategist you are instead of the secretary you've been forced to become." His voice dropped to a whisper as he braced his hands on her chair's armrests. "But mostly, I'm jealous because when he talks about the future, he assumes you'll be part of it, and I have no right to make the same assumption." The confession was raw and vulnerable and completely devastating. Nala reached up to touch his face, feeling the tension in his jaw. "You have every right," she said softly. "You've always had every right." The following Monday brought a crisis that would test their ability to work together as partners rather than boss and employee. Morrison Industries, their largest client, was threatening to cancel their contract due to concerns about the acquisition and its impact on service quality. "They want a meeting," Harrison said grimly, reviewing the email. "Today. With both of us." "Both of us?" "They specifically requested you be present. Apparently you've been their primary point of contact for 3 years, and they're concerned about continuity of service." It was the first time since the acquisition that Nala would be in a meeting as something other than Harrison's assistant. The prospect was both thrilling and terrifying. The meeting started badly and got worse. James Morrison, the CEO, was polite but skeptical, his concerns about the acquisition evident in every question. "Miss Jones," he said, "I have to ask directly, are you comfortable with these new arrangements? Because frankly, reducing someone of your caliber to an administrative role raises questions about Caldwell Investments' understanding of talent management." Nala felt Harrison tense beside her, but before she could answer, he spoke up. Mr. Morrison, Miss Jones's role has evolved to focus on strategic consulting across multiple divisions. She's working directly with me to ensure continuity and enhancement of services to key clients like yourself. It was a diplomatic way of elevating her position without admitting the original demotion had been a mistake. I see, Morrison said, but his expression remained doubtful. And the European expansion project we discussed last quarter? The one Miss Jones was so passionate about? This was Nala's moment. She could either support Harrison's authority as the new CEO or advocate for her own vision. In the old dynamic, she would have fought for her project regardless of the political implications. Now, she had to find a way to be true to her vision while supporting their partnership. The European expansion remains viable, she said carefully, but Mr. Caldwell has raised valid concerns about timeline and resource allocation that need to be addressed before we can move forward responsibly. Harrison shot her a surprised look. She was supporting his position while leaving room for negotiation, exactly what a true partner would do. However, she continued, I believe there's a middle ground that could satisfy both growth objectives and risk management requirements. Perhaps a phased approach, starting with the Frankfurt market where we have the strongest preliminary interest. Morrison's face brightened. That's exactly the kind of strategic thinking we value. Can you have a revised proposal ready by next week? We can, Harrison said, his emphasis on we sending warmth spiraling through Nala's chest. After Morrison left, they stood in the conference room, the success of their collaboration hanging between them like a shared victory. That was, Harrison began. Partnership, Nala finished. That's what it looked like when we trusted each other's judgment. I'd forgotten how good we were together. The double meaning in his words sent heat flooding through her veins. They were standing closer now, the conference table between them and the rest of the office, the late afternoon sun casting everything in golden light. We were good together, she agreed softly, at everything. That evening, they stayed late to work on the Morrison proposal, falling into their old rhythm of collaborative brilliance. Nala handled market analysis while Harrison focused on financial projections, their different strengths complementing each other perfectly. Try the 15-month timeline instead of 12, Harrison suggested, looking over her shoulder at the computer screen. It gives us more flexibility if there are regulatory delays. His breath was warm against her ear, his cologne making her dizzy with memory and want. She could feel the heat radiating from his body, could hear the slight catch in his breathing that told her he was as affected as she was. That's good, she managed, her voice slightly breathless. But we should adjust the staffing projections accordingly. His hand covered hers on the mouse, ostensibly helping her navigate the spreadsheet, but really just an excuse to touch her. The contact sent electricity shooting up her arm. Nala, he said quietly, and she could hear the struggle in his voice. I know. She leaned back against his chest, just for a moment, just to feel solid and safe and cherished. I know we shouldn't, but I can't stop wanting you. His arms came around her waist, holding her against him. 3 years, and I still wake up reaching for you. I still save good news to share with you first. I still think of you as my home. She turned in his arms, looking up into eyes that held all the love and longing she'd been afraid to hope for. Take me home, she whispered. Take me home and show me. The words hung between them like a bridge across 3 years of separation and hurt. Harrison searched her face, looking for any sign of doubt or hesitation. Are you sure? Because once we cross this line, there's no going back to professional distance. Once I have you again, I won't be able to pretend I don't love you. I don't want you to pretend. She rose up on her toes, her lips a breath away from his. I love you too. I never stopped loving you. This time, when he kissed her, it was with 3 years of starvation, 3 years of dreams and regrets and desperate longing. She kissed him back with equal hunger, pouring everything she'd been too afraid to say into the connection between them. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Harrison rested his forehead against hers. My place or yours? Yours, she said without hesitation. I want to see if you still have our wedding picture on the nightstand. His smile was radiant, transforming his face from handsome to absolutely beautiful. I have all our pictures, every single one. As they gathered their things and headed for the elevator, Nala felt something she hadn't experienced in 3 years. Hope. Not just for their relationship, but for the possibility that love and ambition didn't have to be enemies, that partnership could make both of them stronger instead of tearing them apart. The elevator doors closed on their professional lives and opened on the possibility of everything they'd lost and everything they might still build together. Chapter 3. Harrison's penthouse apartment was exactly as Nala remembered. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Elliott Bay, modern furniture that managed to be both elegant and comfortable. And yes, their wedding picture still sitting on his nightstand, silver frame gleaming in the moonlight. "You weren't lying," she said softly, touching the frame with reverent fingers. "I never lied to you, Nala, about anything." He stood behind her, his hands settling on her waist. "Even when the truth hurt both of us." She turned in his arms, seeing the man she'd married beneath 3 years of hurt and professional armor. "Show me," she whispered. "Show me you never stopped loving me." What happened next was 3 years of longing distilled into perfect connection. Harrison loved her with the reverence of someone who'd thought he'd lost everything precious, while she surrendered with the trust of someone finally coming home. "I dreamed about this," he whispered against her skin as they moved together in the moonlight. "Every night for 3 years, I dreamed about holding you again." "I'm here," she breathed, her fingers tracing the familiar planes of his chest. "I'm here, and I'm yours, and I'm never leaving again." When dawn found them tangled in sheets and possibilities, they both knew everything had changed. The careful professional distance was gone, replaced by the kind of partnership they'd once thought lost forever. "We need to talk about work," Harrison said as they shared coffee in his kitchen, both of them wearing his shirts, both glowing with the aftermath of reconnection. "I know. This complicates everything. Or simplifies it." He pulled her against him, his chin resting on top of her head. "I love you, Nala. I want to be with you. I want to build something together, not just professionally, but personally. A life, a future, maybe even a family someday." The words sent warmth flooding through her chest. "The board will have concerns about our relationship affecting business decisions." "Let them have concerns. Our relationship doesn't compromise our judgment, it enhances it. We make better decisions together than either of us makes alone. And the employees who see me as your secretary will see you as my partner in every sense of the word." Returning to the office after their night together should have been awkward, but instead, it felt like putting on clothes that finally fit properly. They moved together with the easy synchronization of true partners, finishing each other's sentences, anticipating each other's needs. Lisa Sterling took one look at them and grinned. "Good morning, Miss Jones, Mr. Caldwell. You both look, refreshed." "Lisa," Nala warned, but she was smiling. "I'm just saying, there's a different energy between you two today, a good energy." She wasn't wrong. The tension that had crackled between them for weeks was gone, replaced by something warmer and more sustainable, the easy intimacy of people who belong together. That harmony lasted exactly 2 hours. "We have a problem," Harrison said grimly, hanging up his phone. "Kate Salvatore's calling an emergency board meeting for Friday. She's questioning the Morrison Industries contract renewal and suggesting my personal relationship with you is compromising my business judgment." Nala felt ice form in her stomach. "How does she know about our relationship?" "Someone saw us leaving together last night, or maybe they just suspected based on office gossip." He ran his hands through his hair. "It doesn't matter how she knows. What matters is that she's using it against us." "Against you," Nala corrected. "I'm the liability here, Harrison. I'm the one making your position vulnerable." "Don't you dare!" His voice was sharp with warning. "Don't you dare start thinking that way." "What way?" "Like you're a burden I need to carry instead of a partner who makes me stronger." He moved around his desk to stand in front of her. "Kate Salvatore is threatened by our relationship because she can't manipulate two people who trust each other the way she can manipulate someone who's isolated." As if summoned by their conversation, Kate Salvatore appeared in Harrison's office doorway, her smile sharp. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important," she said, her eyes taking in their positions. Harrison standing protectively close to Nala, both of them defensive and united. Miss Salvatore, Harrison said coolly, to what do we owe this pleasure? I wanted to discuss Friday's board meeting personally. Make sure we're all on the same page about the challenges facing the company. What challenges would those be? Kate's smile widened. Leadership decisions that appear to be influenced by personal relationships rather than fiduciary responsibility. The Morrison Industries contract, for instance. I understand Miss Jones played a significant role in those negotiations. Miss Jones's expertise was invaluable, Harrison replied evenly. I'm sure it was. Her expertise in, what exactly? Strategic planning? Or managing her former boss's emotions? The insult hung in the air like acid smoke. Nala felt Harrison tense beside her, his protective instincts warring with professional diplomacy. Miss Salvatore, Nala said quietly, if you have concerns about my professional qualifications, I'm happy to discuss them. My track record speaks for itself. Does it? Because from where I sit, it looks like you've leveraged a personal relationship to maintain influence over business decisions that should be made objectively. And from where I sit, Harrison said, his voice dangerously quiet, it looks like you're questioning my judgment because you don't like the decisions I'm making. Kate's mask of professional courtesy slipped slightly. I'm questioning your judgment because you're letting personal feelings override shareholder interests. Shareholder interests? Harrison stepped forward, and Nala felt the temperature in the room drop several degrees. Tell me, Kate, exactly how do shareholder interests benefit from destabilizing client relationships, alienating key personnel, and creating an atmosphere of uncertainty and mistrust? The challenge was direct and unmistakable. Kate's eyes glittered with fury. We'll see what the board thinks about that on Friday, she said sweetly. I'm sure they'll be very interested in your perspective on the relationship between personal satisfaction and professional responsibility. After she left, Harrison slammed his hand against his desk, hard enough to make his coffee cup jump. She's going to try to destroy both of us, Nala said quietly. Let her try. His jaw was set with determination. We have something she doesn't understand. We have trust. We have partnership. And we have the truth. The next day brought a crisis that tested their ability to maintain professional composure while their personal relationship intensified. A water main break in the building forced them to relocate to Harrison's backup office, a much smaller space that required them to work in uncomfortably close quarters. This is impossible, Nala muttered, trying to access files while Harrison reviewed contracts at the same desk. Every time she moved, she brushed against him. Every breath brought his cologne flooding her senses. We managed in smaller spaces during our Harvard days, Harrison said, but his voice was strained. That was different. We weren't trying to maintain professional boundaries then. Are we maintaining them now? The question hung between them as she leaned across him to reach a document, her body pressing against his side. She felt him go still beneath her, heard his breath catch. Nala, he warned. I know. But she didn't move away. Instead, she found herself looking down at him, at the way his pupils dilated, the way his lips parted slightly. We're in the office, he said weakly. It's after hours. The building's mostly empty because of the water situation. Anyone could walk in. Let them. The words surprised both of them. Nala straightened but didn't step away. I'm tired of hiding, she said firmly. I'm tired of pretending we're just colleagues. I'm tired of acting like what we have is something to be ashamed of. Harrison studied her face, seeing the resolution there, the courage that had first attracted him to her years ago. The board meeting is Friday, he reminded her. I know. Kate will use any evidence of our relationship against us. Then let's give her something worth talking about. Before he could ask what she meant, she leaned down and kissed him, soft and sweet and utterly without apology. When she pulled back, his eyes were blazing. You're sure about this? I've never been more sure of anything. Thursday morning brought Nala into the office with a fever and a stubborn refusal to go home. You're sick, Harrison said, taking one look at her flushed cheeks and glassy eyes. You should be in bed. I'm fine. We have too much to prepare for tomorrow's meeting. She swayed slightly, and Harrison was beside her in an instant, steady hands on her shoulders. Conference room, he said firmly. Now. He guided her to the leather couch in his private conference room, his touch gentle but implacable. When she tried to protest, he silenced her with a look. "You're burning up," he said, pressing his palm to her forehead. "When did you last eat something?" "I don't remember." He disappeared and returned with soup from the executive dining room, water and aspirin. For the next hour, he alternated between nursing her and handling both their workloads, his care so tender and attentive that she felt tears prick her eyes. "You don't have to do this," she said weakly. "I'm not your responsibility." "Yes, you are." His voice was matter-of-fact. "You're my partner, my love, my future wife if you'll have me again. Of course you're my responsibility." The casual mention of marriage made her heart skip. "Future wife? Did I not mention that?" His smile was gentle as he brushed hair from her forehead. "I'm planning to marry you again, Nala Jones. Properly this time. With partnership and trust and all the things we were too young and scared to build the first time." While Nala dozed on his conference room couch, Harrison made a discovery that changed everything. Going through financial records to prepare for Friday's board meeting, he found irregularities in Kate Salvatore's investment history, patterns that suggested her acquisition targets weren't chosen for their profit potential, but for their vulnerability to asset stripping. "Robert," he said into his phone, calling his old friend and legal counsel, "I need you to look into something for me, quietly." By evening, the picture was becoming clear. Kate Salvatore hadn't just orchestrated the takeover of Nala's company. She'd been systematically targeting logistics firms for acquisition and dismantling. 3 other companies had been purchased by her investment group in the past year, their assets stripped and sold, their employees scattered. "She's not building a business empire," Harrison said grimly to Nala, who was finally feeling well enough to sit up and review the evidence. "She's eliminating competition for someone else. But for whom? That's what we need to find out, and we need to find out before tomorrow's board meeting." Working late into the night, they developed a strategy to expose Kate's scheme. It was risky, potentially career-ending if they were wrong, but it was their only chance to turn the tables before she destroyed both their reputations. "Are you sure about this?" Harrison asked as they finalized their plan. "I'm sure about us," Nala replied, "and if we're going down together as partners." He kissed her then, soft and desperate and full of love. "Tomorrow changes everything," he said against her lips. "It already has." Friday morning dawned gray and drizzly, matching the tension that filled the Caldwell Investments boardroom. 12 board members assembled around the mahogany table, their expressions ranging from curious to concerned to openly hostile. Kate Salvatore sat at the far end of the table, perfectly composed and radiating confidence. Beside her, Anthony Reed looked uncomfortable but resigned. They presented a united front of opposition to Harrison's leadership. Harrison took his position at the head of the table, with Nala beside him, not behind him as a secretary might stand, but beside him as an equal partner. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone in the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," Harrison began, his voice carrying the authority that had made him one of Seattle's most respected businessmen. "Thank you for attending this emergency meeting. I know Miss Salvatore has raised concerns about my leadership decisions, and I welcome the opportunity to address them directly." "Thank you, Harrison," Kate said smoothly. "I think we all appreciate your willingness to discuss these delicate matters openly." The battle lines were drawn. In the next hour, either Harrison and Nala would emerge vindicated as true partners, or their careers would be destroyed by the woman who'd manipulated them both from the beginning. But they had something Kate didn't understand. They had each other, and they had the truth. And sometimes that was enough to move mountains, or at least to move board members who'd forgotten that the best business decisions came from the heart as much as the head. The meeting was about to begin, and everything they'd worked for, everything they'd built together, hung in the balance. Chapter 4. "Before we address Miss Salvatore's concerns," Harrison continued, "I want to present some information that came to light during my preparation for this meeting. Information that I believe will put recent events in proper context." He activated the presentation screen, displaying the first slide, a timeline of Kate's acquisitions over the past 2 years. In the past 24 months, Salvatore Investment Group has orchestrated the acquisition and subsequent dismantling of 4 logistics companies. In each case, the pattern was identical: hostile takeover, rapid asset liquidation, and destruction of the target company's operational capacity. Murmurs ran around the table as board members studied the data. This company was intended to be the fifth victim of this systematic scheme. Kate's composure cracked slightly. "That's a serious accusation, Harrison. Do you have evidence to support these conspiracy theories?" "I have financial records, communication transcripts, and testimony from former employees of the destroyed companies. But more importantly, I have recordings of conversations between you and your co-conspirator." Harrison's eyes fixed on Anthony Reed, who had gone pale as death. "Anthony," Harrison said quietly, "would you like to explain to the board why you recommended this particular acquisition, why you pushed so hard for rapid restructuring and asset liquidation, why you've been receiving monthly payments from Kate Salvatore's investment group for the past year?" The accusation hit Anthony like a physical blow. His hands trembled as he realized his betrayal had been discovered. "Harrison, you don't understand." "I understand perfectly." Harrison activated an audio file and Anthony's voice filled the boardroom. "The logistics sector is ripe for disruption. These smaller companies are bleeding money, perfect for asset stripping if you can manipulate the acquisition price. Caldwell has the reputation to make it look legitimate." The recording continued, revealing Anthony's detailed discussions with Kate about timing hostile takeovers to coincide with target companies' vulnerable moments, maximizing extraction value while minimizing regulatory scrutiny. "This conversation took place 3 days ago," Harrison said when the audio ended. Anthony believed he was speaking privately with Kate Salvatore. He was unaware that Washington is a one-party consent state for recording conversations. The boardroom erupted in angry voices. Anthony Reed, Harrison's trusted mentor for 15 years, had sold them out for financial gain and the promise of a position in Kate's shadow organization. "Anthony," board chairman Margaret Torres said coldly, "do you have anything to say in your defense?" Anthony's face was gray with shame and defeat. "Kate promised me. She said the sector was consolidating anyway, that we could either profit from the disruption or be destroyed by it. She made it sound like we were positioning ourselves to survive industry evolution, not destroying functioning companies." "And the payments?" Torres demanded. "Consulting fees, she called them. I thought I was being compensated for strategic advice, not for betraying Harrison's trust." Kate Salvatore was trapped, but she wasn't finished. Her face was a mask of cold fury as she realized her carefully constructed conspiracy was unraveling. "This is all very dramatic," she said, her voice sharp as glass, "but it doesn't address the fundamental issue. Harrison's judgment has been compromised by his personal relationship with Miss Jones. You cannot seriously expect this board to ignore the fact that he's making business decisions based on his feelings for his ex-wife." The personal attack hung in the air like poison. Several board members shifted uncomfortably, clearly concerned about the implications. "You're right," Harrison said quietly, surprising everyone, including Kate. "My feelings for Nala have absolutely influenced my business decisions." Kate's eyes gleamed with victory as gasps ran around the table. "But not in the way you're suggesting," Harrison continued, moving to stand behind Nala's chair. "My relationship with her has made me a better businessman, more strategic, more thoughtful, more willing to consider long-term consequences instead of short-term profits." He placed his hands on Nala's shoulders, a gesture of support and partnership that was clearly visible to everyone in the room. 3 years ago, I divorced the most brilliant strategic mind I've ever encountered because I was too proud to admit that I needed her partnership to be successful. Working with her again has reminded me why we were such a formidable team when we trusted each other." Nala rose to stand beside him, their united front unmistakable. "Every recommendation I've made," she said, her voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment, "every analysis I've provided, every solution I've proposed has been based on sound business principles and verifiable data. My personal relationship with Harrison has never compromised my professional integrity. It's enhanced it." "How convenient," Kate sneered, the ex-wife vouching for the ex-husband's competence. Before either Harrison or Nala could respond, the boardroom door opened and Brandon Clark entered with Lisa Sterling and Robert Covey, all carrying thick folders of documentation. I'm sorry to interrupt, Brandon said, his voice firm with newfound confidence. But I believe this board needs to see evidence of Miss Jones's professional contributions before making any decisions about her influence on company operations. Brandon began distributing documents to the board members, his earlier hero worship transformed into professional advocacy. Financial projections showing that Miss Jones's restructuring recommendations will save the company $37 million over 3 years. Performance metrics proving that preserved positions contribute measurably to productivity and innovation. Client satisfaction data demonstrating that employee stability directly correlates with customer retention and revenue growth. Lisa Sterling stepped forward with her own evidence. Employee satisfaction surveys showing a 43% improvement in morale since Mr. Caldwell implemented Miss Jones's recommendations. Productivity reports indicating that retained employees are performing at 15% above previous benchmarks. Client feedback specifically praising the continuity of service provided by stable staffing. Robert Covey, as the company's legal counsel, provided the final blow to Kate's credibility. Documentation proving that Ms. Salvatore's proposed asset liquidation scheme would have violated federal regulations regarding the disposal of intellectual property in publicly traded companies. Implementation of her recommendations would have exposed this company to massive legal liability and potential criminal charges. The weight of evidence was overwhelming. Far from being emotionally driven wishful thinking, Nala's recommendations were proving to be brilliant business strategy that had saved the company from both financial disaster and legal catastrophe. Kate was cornered, and she knew it. Her professional mask completely abandoned, she launched into a desperate character assassination. "This is a witch hunt," she said wildly. "You're all being manipulated by a woman who's using her sexual history with the CEO to advance her own agenda. She's sleeping her way back to power while destroying shareholder value." The ugly accusation hung in the air like poison, designed to destroy Nala's credibility through personal attack. But before Harrison could respond, Margaret Torres stood up, her face cold with disgust. "Miss Salvatore," she said icily, "your comments are not only inappropriate and potentially libelous, they're completely irrelevant to the business matters before this board." She turned to address the full board. "I've reviewed the financial data, the strategic analyses, and the legal documentation presented here today. The evidence is clear. Miss Jones's recommendations have demonstrably improved this company's performance, while Miss Salvatore's proposed actions would have constituted fraud and exposed us to criminal liability." Other board members began voicing agreement, the tide of opinion turning decisively against Kate. "Furthermore," Margaret continued, "the relationship between Mr. Caldwell and Miss Jones, whatever its nature, has produced measurably superior business outcomes. Personal compatibility that enhances professional performance is an asset, not a liability. Therefore," Margaret announced, "I'm calling for an immediate vote of no confidence in Miss Salvatore's position on this board and a recommendation that her investment group's involvement with this company be terminated immediately." "Seconded," called board member after board member. "All in favor?" 11 hands rose around the table. Only Anthony Reed abstained, his face gray with shame. "The motion passes unanimously," Margaret announced. "Miss Salvatore, you're removed from this board effective immediately. Security will escort you from the building." Kate's face twisted with rage as security guards entered the boardroom. "This isn't over," she hissed at Harrison and Nala. "I'll destroy both of you. I'll make sure everyone in this industry knows exactly what kind of man sacrifices fiduciary responsibility for personal gratification." "Actually," Harrison said calmly, "I think everyone will know exactly what kind of man I am. The kind who values integrity over manipulation, partnership over personal gain, and long-term success over short-term extraction." As security escorted Kate from the room, Harrison turned to address the remaining board members. "Before we conclude, there's something else I need to say." He looked around the boardroom, meeting each member's eyes. 3 years ago, I let pride and insecurity destroy the best professional and personal partnership I'd ever known. I gave up the most brilliant strategic mind I'd ever worked with because I was too stubborn to admit that she made me better at everything I did. He turned to Nala, his expression soft with love and determination. I won't make that mistake again." To everyone's shock, Harrison dropped to one knee right there in the boardroom, pulling out a small velvet box that made Nala's heart stop. "Nala Jones," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the stunned silence, "you are the most brilliant strategist, the most ethical leader, and the most courageous partner I've ever known." He opened the box to reveal her grandmother's diamond ring, the one she'd returned during their divorce, the one she'd never thought she'd see again. "I love your refusal to compromise your principles. I love the way you fight for people who can't fight for themselves. I love how you make me want to be worthy of your partnership." Tears were streaming down her face as the entire board watched the most public proposal in corporate history. "Will you marry me again? Will you be my partner in business and in life? Will you help me build something that honors both profit and people?" The boardroom was silent except for the sound of her tears. Every eye was fixed on her, waiting for her answer to the question that would define not just their personal future, but the future of the company itself. She looked down at Harrison, this brilliant, complicated, wonderful man who'd learned to trust her enough to be vulnerable, to value her enough to share power, to love her enough to fight for their second chance. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes to all of it, the partnership, the marriage, the life we'll build together as equals." The boardroom erupted in applause as Harrison slipped the ring onto her finger and rose to kiss her with 3 years of longing and hope and absolute commitment. When they finally broke apart, breathless and laughing and crying all at once, Margaret Torres was beaming. "Well," she said dryly, "I think it's safe to say this company is in excellent hands. I'd like to propose a formal motion to offer Miss Jones the position of Chief Strategy Officer with authority equal to the CEO in all matters of company direction and growth." "Seconded," called multiple voices around the table. "All in favor?" Every hand in the room rose without hesitation. The truth about Harrison's sacrifice changes everything, but will it be enough to save their love and their company? These two are about to face their biggest test yet. Hit that subscribe button because this emotional roller coaster is just getting started. 6 months later, Nala stood before the mirror in her bridal suite, adjusting the simple elegance of her ivory dress. This time, there would be no elaborate ceremony, no 500-person guest list, no pressure to create the perfect corporate power wedding. This time, it was just about them. "Ready?" Lisa Sterling asked, appearing in the doorway with a bouquet of sunflowers. Brandon's choice, she'd insisted, after he'd overcome his initial heartbreak to become one of their strongest supporters. "More than ready." The ceremony took place in the rooftop garden of their office building, surrounded by employees who'd become family, board members who'd become friends, and the family who'd never stopped believing they belonged together. Harrison stood at the altar in a simple black suit, his eyes bright with joy as she walked toward him. When she reached him, he took her hands and spoke vows they had written together. "I promise to be your partner in all things, your equal in business, your champion in life, and your safe harbor in any storm. I promise to trust your judgment, support your dreams, and never let pride come between us again." Her vows were just as simple and just as powerful. "I promise to share my burdens with you instead of carrying them alone. I promise to trust you with my vulnerabilities, include you in my decisions, and never choose work over us again. I promise to be your partner in building something beautiful that honors both love and ambition." When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, the kiss they shared tasted like second chances and infinite possibilities. 2 years later, Nala stood in her office, the Chief Strategy Officer suite that occupied the corner of the executive floor, with windows facing both the city and Harrison's office across the hall. The nameplate on her door read, "Nala Jones Caldwell, Chief Strategy Officer," a hyphenated identity that honored both her independence and their partnership. The company had not only survived Kate Salvatore's attempted destruction, it had thrived beyond all projections. Stock prices were at historic highs, employee satisfaction scores had reached industry-leading levels, and they'd successfully expanded into 7 international markets. More importantly, they'd become the industry standard for ethical business practices, proving that companies could be both profitable and principled when leadership prioritized partnership over power. Mrs. Caldwell? Lisa Sterling appeared in her doorway with a familiar smile. Your husband is here to see you. Nala looked up from her strategic planning reports to find Harrison leaning against her doorframe, his suit jacket draped over his arm, his tie loosened, his expression soft with the contentment that had become his default since their remarriage. Mr. Caldwell, she said with mock formality, to what do I owe this pleasure? Mrs. Caldwell, he replied, playing along with their game, I was hoping you might be available for a lunch meeting. I have a proposition that requires your strategic expertise. What kind of proposition? He stepped into her office and closed the door behind him, transforming the space from professional to intimate. The kind that involves celebrating our second anniversary, discussing our 5-year expansion plans, and exploring the possibility of adding a third partner to our team. The last part made her heart skip. They'd been trying for a baby for 6 months, wanting to create something beautiful that combined their genes, their values, and their shared vision for the future. That sounds like a very complex negotiation, she said, rising from her desk and moving toward him. What are you prepared to offer in exchange for my consideration? Everything, he said simply, his arms coming around her waist. My love, my partnership, my absolute commitment to building a life that honors both our ambitions and our dreams. And if I drive a hard bargain, then I'll meet every demand because you're worth it. We're worth it. He kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of promise, and she thought about how far they'd traveled from that devastating morning when she'd stood in this building as his secretary, broken and desperate and convinced she'd lost everything that mattered. Instead, she'd found something better than what they'd lost, a partnership built on trust instead of assumption, understanding instead of expectation, shared strength instead of individual struggle. I love you, she murmured against his lips. I love you too, he replied. Partner. The word still sent thrills through her, still felt like the most beautiful promise he could make. Through her office windows, Seattle sparkled in the spring sunshine, full of possibility and promise. In the building around them, over 1,000 employees now worked for a company that had proven success didn't require sacrificing your soul. And in her arms, Harrison held her like she was precious, like she was cherished, like she was exactly where she belonged. The story of Harrison and Nayla Caldwell became legend in Seattle's business. Community. Proof that sometimes the most successful mergers weren't between companies, but between hearts that had learned to trust each other completely. Their company, now called Caldwell Jones Logistics, had become the gold standard for ethical business practices and sustainable growth. Business schools taught case studies about their integration model. Other companies tried to replicate their culture of partnership and mutual respect. But most importantly, they'd proved that love and ambition weren't enemies. They were allies when grounded in trust, communication, and the courage to be vulnerable with the person who mattered most. Harrison had acquired Nala's company to save it, but in the end, they'd both acquired something far more valuable: the wisdom to choose partnership over pride, the strength to build something together that neither could create alone, and the trust to believe that the right person didn't limit your dreams. They helped you achieve them. It was, by any measure, the most successful acquisition in corporate history. And every morning when they walked into their building together, hand in hand, equal partners in business and in love, employees would smile and remember that sometimes fairy tales did come true in corner offices. Have you ever had to choose between love and ambition? Have you discovered that the right person makes you stronger rather than weaker? Share your own second-chance love stories in the comments below. I read every single one, and they inspire the tales I tell. If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button and subscribe for more tales of love, redemption, and second chances. Tomorrow I'll be sharing another story about finding love when you least expect it. You won't want to miss it. Tell me in the comments, what would you have done in Nala's position? Would you have taken that secretary job to save your company? Your perspectives help shape the stories I choose to tell.